Hello, and welcome to another Symbolic Studies live stream. I am your host, Mario. I am your host, Mario. I hope you're all doing well today. We've got an interesting presentation for you all. We're going to be talking about the pentagram, the five-pointed star, and the number five, and the significance of the number five. It's fascinating because sometimes you don't know what rabbit holes you're going to fall into or go down. And over the last couple of months, the pentagram has been really showing itself. The number five has really been presenting itself to me in my research. And I have just been following this thread, and I just have a few things I want to get off my chest regarding the pentagram that I think some of you guys might be interested in. So I figure, before May is over with, the fifth month of the year, right? I figured I would talk about some of my research and some of the insights that I've been getting as of late regarding the number five. And I timed this presentation to coincide with 52323, which when you reduce it down, it's 555, right? And then I also chose to go live right now at 5:55 p.m. Pacific time, just to have a little bit of fun and kind of, encode the stream with more magical five related things. And so before we get into it, I just want to say that if you want to support the channel, of course, you can do so by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Also, if you like what you're seeing here, you can support me on Patreon, patreon.com/symbolicstudies. And speaking of Patreon, thank you so much to all of my patrons, which you see here. So very quickly, Amy, Troy, Amanda, Chance, Abby, Nicholas, Yakov, Monica, Nomad, Sarah, Julia, LS, Judy, Barbara, Adrian, Crystal, Christina, Eloise, Mia, Kurt, Lockstep, AC Slayer, and Benjamin Hoff. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. And another way to support the channel, by the way, is if you're interested in prints or artwork. I have some of those, and I don't promote them enough, I don't think. I have 3 silkscreen prints available. The original idea was to basically create a series of 12 prints, one per sign, and this is my Gemini piece right here. So if you know a Gemini, maybe they might like this as a birthday gift. If you're a Gemini, you might appreciate this. There is a lot going on in this piece. I illustrated the entire thing. I hired a silk screener who's been doing it forever for all sorts of huge, just renowned bands throughout the decades. And I have 100 of these available. They're, like I said, silk screened by hand. I hand sign every single one, ship it out myself. You also get a Symbolic Studies bookmark. You get a study packet, and you actually get a little piece of paper that tells you about the symbolism behind this piece. So if you want to know what's going on with that central sort of design, if you want to know more about the twin pillars, all of these different things that are going on within this print, I talk about that because the idea behind doing this series is that I wanted to essentially design a piece that encodes a lot of esoteric information about the sign itself. So much so that you could pretty much give a class based on this artwork. And so there are a lot of things related to Gemini in here. So if you're interested, you could check out my Etsy. I have a link in the description if you're so inclined. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the pentagram. Man, I mean, there is so much to say regarding the pentagram, the pentacle, the five-pointed star, right? And I think in a lot of ways, we kind of take it for granted. I think that we probably have been exposed to it so much throughout our lives that it's really easy, perhaps, to overlook the significance of this shape, right? And all of the things that it could imply, all of the things that it could encode. At least I know for myself that was the case. It wasn't until recently was my mind really, really blown with all of the different things that the pentagram symbolizes. And obviously, there are positive things associated with it. There are seemingly negative things some people think related to the symbol. And so it's kind of a controversial symbol that way. Not the most controversial. I can think of a few other symbols. But certainly there are people who feel as though if you're going to maybe wear a necklace with this symbol or a t-shirt with it, that you're implying something about your worldview or how you see the spiritual realm or whatever. And so to me, I just want to talk about this from a perspective that basically includes a lot of different cultural opinions about this symbol and what it has meant to various groups throughout the ages, right? The first thing, though, that I think about is obviously 5, right? There's 5 points here. The inside of the pentagram makes an upside down pentagon, a pentagon that's pointing downward. And so the number 5 and the pentagram are intrinsically linked. They cannot be separated at all. So pentagram symbolism is the symbolism of the number 5, right? And when you're talking about 5, the correspondences are many. But the first thing I personally think of is the 5 elements, or the 5 elements, right? And so you have air, water, fire, and earth. The 5th element is spirit, right? And so that would be the upper point there on the pentacle. And so when you're dealing with 5, you're dealing with the 5 elements. And spirit or ether itself, symbolic of the 5th element, is symbolic of the quintessence, quin being related to the number 5, right? Like quintile or a quintet, right? And so the 5th element, spirit, contains all of the elements and it is from which all of the elements came from. And so to me, I have it indicated here as a spiral, but I would say that a circle would also be appropriate. There's a few other designs that could be appropriate, but that's what I have here is a spiral. To me, this very much relates to spirit in that spirit is endless, that there's a continual sort of aspect to spirit that never ends. There's an infinite quality to spirit versus here in the material world, things seem to be finite here. Also, we will see that the spiral itself, the golden mean or the golden spiral, and the relationships between 5 and phi, are very, very interesting. And we'll be getting into that here in a few slides. But the spiral itself, the spiral of life, it relates to the pentacle as well, or the pentagram. And so to me, for a few reasons, this is an appropriate sigil or symbol for spirit itself. So the 5 elements, right? Well, it's really interesting because there are 5 Platonic solids. And the dodecahedron, the pentagonal dodecahedron, you see that pentagon right there, this is the Platonic solid that corresponds with spirit or ether, the 5th element. And isn't it interesting that it utilizes the pentagon to create its shape? And so if you've never looked into it, the Platonic solids are very interesting. They are shapes that are created out of just one singular shape, and there's one Platonic solid per element. And the one that corresponds with spirit is this one right here, the dodecahedron. And so to me, that's kind of intriguing, right? Just the fact that there would be this relationship between the pentagon and the 5 and it being the 5th, right, element, spirit. And obviously, if you just look in the natural world, there are so many instances of the 5. And I've just been, taking walks lately and hikes, and the amount of flowers and just different types of plants that make use of the 5. is very, very interesting. More than I think I originally maybe would have assumed. But now that I'm really, really paying attention to it, I'm just seeing it all over the place. And so studying the natural world, five becomes a very, very interesting number. And there are a lot of instances in it all over the place. And you don't even have to look that far. All you have to do is look in the mirror, right? And we have five main appendages, right? And we have five fingers. And the relationship with the pentacle, which we'll be getting into soon, and the distance between different points within the pentacle speaks to the ratio that you're going to find all over the place on our body, right? And so there are so many sacred geometrical things related to the five, related to the pentagram and pentacle. It kind of makes your head spin, to be honest. And so I'm realizing that I still have a lot more studying to do in order to fully wrap my head around the significance here of what I'm kind of presenting. And so this is, this presentation doesn't cover everything that the pentagram represents, nor the five. I was actually really surprised to read in some of my symbolism books the length and depth of the number five entries. And so I have lots of resources here where you can look up the symbolism of any number. And some of the five entries were really, really deep and kind of blew me away with all of the various correspondences and how it shows up in mythology and religion and all that kind of stuff. But the number five obviously has this connection with man, these four appendages and then your head, right? The head also kind of being, this upper point related to spirit is very interesting because the head is what controls everything else here, right? The two arms and the two legs. And so this is a theme that we'll kind of be getting into. This idea of four, perhaps four pillars, four horses, four, appendages, four limbs, and then this fifth thing that controls the four other things. This is kind of baked into pentagram symbolism and number five symbolism, as far as I'm concerned. And so here you can see a classic depiction of man within a pentacle or pentagram. It kind of reminds me of the Vitruvian Man a little bit, but it's a little bit different, right? And then, of course, I had to bring up the sigil of Baphomet. And you see that goat or Baphomet head within that pentagram. And this is inverted. So this is the point going downward towards Earth, if you will. And this is the symbol for the Church of Satan, right? And so it's really interesting that a goat head would fit within an inverted pentagram. And this makes so much sense for so many different reasons. As an example, there's a lot of tarot cards that show the devil, and he has a pentagram, an inverted pentagram on his forehead, right? And actually, when you study a lot of classic devil cards, you're going to notice, especially like the Rider-Waite devil card, all of the energy is being drawn downward. And so his legs draw your eye downward, his horns draw your eye downward. Seemingly everything within, that canvas is drawing your eye downward towards Earth. And I don't have it here, but even if you look at the symbol for Capricorn, Capricorn has like this downward arrow, and then there's this swooping sort of thing to the side of it, right? The Capricorn symbol, if you just imagine it, there's really two sides to the Capricorn symbol. One side is a downward pointing arrow, and the other side looks like it's supposed to be a serpent or a fish, right? So the first side relates to the goat, and then the second side relates to the fish aspect of the sign. Capricorn, right, is the sea goat. So it would make sense that the symbol itself is kind of a hybrid of sorts. But that downward arrow in the Capricorn glyph is the same as this downward arrow right here for the goat, right? Sea goat. And so it's been said that that downward arrow in the Capricorn glyph is actually the beard of the goat. I've heard two main explanations for this downward little divot thing. And it is either the beard of a goat. And so just imagine how their beards kind of taper right towards the bottom of their goatee. And the other explanation is that downward point or divot is actually symbolic of the hoof of a goat as well, which is its connection to earth, right? And goats are very, very, very earthy. And so I just think it's interesting that there's this whole sort of line of correspondence with the goat, this downward energy. You know, Capricorn is an earth sign. It relates to Saturn, right, which is an earthy planet. And there's some Saturnian stuff that we'll be getting into in just a moment. But just kind of the symbolism of the goat head, of Baphomet's head, fitting within the downward star. Very, very intriguing. And so you will see the pentacle or pentagram used with things like this. So there are some circles that, you know, some people consider to be of a darker nature, you know, that revere the pentagram. But, you know, it's for very good reason. It's because the pentagram, it really is a number, or it's a shape and number, right? The number 5 combined, you know, I mean, it's just the same energy. So I might use pentagram interchangeably with the number 5, but they're really one and the same, in my opinion. The same way the number 4 is one and the same with the square, right? Or the triangle is one and the same with the 3. But the number 5 really is this number that seems to exist between the physical and metaphysical, or between the material realm and the spirit realm, as we will see, basically. And so it seems like it's a number that's in between two different places. And so, which is why in a base 10 system, it's, you know, the middle number, right? And so it's in between, you know, this lower and higher. It's in between the above and the below. And so I think some of the mathematics that I'll be getting into here in just a moment will kind of expand upon all of this. But yes, so you will see it here in the Church of Satan logo or symbol. And some of you guys, if you're interested in ceremonial magic, you might be aware, right, of the pentagram and its use in the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, or lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram. And so my understanding, right, is behind the banishing ritual is that you're clearing the air, you're clearing the energy, and you're also creating a field of protection for your workings. And this isn't so much my thing personally, but I've heard about it so many times over the years that to me, you know, it would make sense that this would be acknowledged in this presentation. And there's probably people here who actually utilize this, right? But I thought it was worth mentioning for obvious reasons. And just to kind of take a little step back regarding stars in general, right? Because the pentagram, the pentacle, the 5-pointed star, it's not the only game in town, right? There's other stars, clearly. But it's really interesting when you start looking at all of the stars and how many points they have. There's actually more overlapping symbolism than not. And so notice that when you add more points to a star, or you add more sides to a polygon, it gets closer and closer to a complete circle. And so, in a way, all stars and all polygons are just a low resolution version of a circle in so many ways. You know, if a circle has infinite points around it and you start reducing those points, and eventually you have, let's just say, 5 points, right? You're going to have a pentagon if you connect all the points, or you're going to have a pentagram if you connect them and make a star out of it. And so stars, in many ways, are trying to be expressive of two things, in my opinion: the sacred center, the point within, and the circle that it's surrounded by. And so to me, there's a direct relationship between stars, polygons, no matter how many sides they have, and the circle. There's kind of no way around that. And so all of these shapes here, all of these stars, they all have that point, that middle point. And then just depending on how many sides they have, how many points there are around it, you're going to obviously get a certain kind of shape out of that combination of things. If you have 5 points, pentagon, 6 points, hexagon, etc., right? But the more points you add, the closer it looks to a circle. And so there's an undeniable relationship with the pentagon, the circle, and the dot within, which we will be getting to here in a little bit. But to me, the first time I saw this layout and they're showing the progression of polygons and the progression of stars, that was one of the revelations for me. And I saw this years ago, but I was like, wow, okay, so the more points, it makes sense. The more sides, it makes sense that it just looks closer and closer to a circle. And so the circle, the mathematics behind the circle are very, very interesting because the numbers that represent the circle are infinite, right? Just like pi itself or phi, which we'll be getting into. So I just wanted to take a quick step back and just kind of acknowledge this fact or this whole entire idea that all of the stars, all of the polygons, regardless of sides or points, have this relationship with the circle. And in my opinion, it's almost like you're looking at a low resolution version of a circle when you have, a limited amount of sides or points. And then we get to the actual 5 itself, right? So this is really interesting to me. And so the number 5, right? This is how we represent 5. If you're not using a Roman numeral, which is V, which we'll be getting into later, this is how you're going to illustrate the 5. What is going on with the 5, right? So upper left, you have that bend, right? You have that one horizontal line, and then underneath you have this hook. Well, some people have speculated that there's actually a relationship between the number 5 and actually one of the symbols of Saturn. So Saturn has more than one glyph, but the least common one of the two, the lesser common glyph for Saturn, looks like this. And so this is a book I have in my library, and because it has such a prominent glyph there right in the middle of the cover, I just thought I would take a photo of it real quick and show you what I'm talking about. And so this book is really fascinating, by the way. It's called Fire and Ice, Magical Teachings of Germany's Greatest Secret Occult Order. And it is essentially all about this German Saturnian cult. And they were all about Saturn, right? And so everything revolved around the principles of Saturn. Some pretty dark stuff going on in there. It's a worthwhile read if you're interested in this sort of material. And there they are utilizing one of the lesser known Saturn glyphs, right? Well, if you just remove the left arm there up top, it looks kind of like a T up top, you can clearly see that it looks like the number 5. And so the number 5 is very much encoded in this sigil, right? It doesn't take much effort to kind of see that there's a relationship here with all of that. And so perhaps there is a relationship, and maybe someone here in the comments knows, or maybe someone watching this after the fact will chime in the comments, and they will let me know what the relationship is here. And so to me, there has to be something going on with this glyph of Saturn and then also the number 5, given their close visual representation that they share with each other, right? And what I've always heard about this glyph, which makes a lot of sense, is the fact that the line, the vertical line with the hook down below, is symbolic of a sickle, right? And Saturn, Father Time, Kronos, these figures oftentimes hold a scythe, right? And the scythe and the sickle are very much related to each other, and it has a lot to do with harvest, right? And harvest, just the idea of harvest can take on several different meanings, right? From an actual seasonal harvest, right, to harvesting people, souls, children, things of that sort. And so Saturn was known for eating his children, right? And so that implication could be made. And so here is just a sickle to kind of show you what I'm talking about. You see that vertical line, that handle, and then you see that curve down below. So to me, it seems as though there could be something going on here with all of this. Is that loop down below with the number 5? Is that symbolic of a sickle? Is that what it's supposed to represent? And then what are the implications of all of that? I don't know. But there is an interesting thing going on as well with the fact that there is, when most people write out 5, that bend right there on the left-hand side, and then the looping portion, there is both a masculine and a feminine sort of thing going on here, in my opinion. So right angles are more masculine. It kind of relates to the square, and that loop, that bulby loop down below, definitely reminds me of a more feminine sort of principle. So it's possible that the upper portion of the 5 represents a more masculine nature, perhaps. The lower portion is more feminine in nature, again, perhaps. And there's the masculine and feminine correspondence with Saturn is not the point of this presentation, but there's things that can kind of be inferred with all of that as well. And then once again, there is that sickle. So this got me thinking, I'm like, a sickle, okay, well, where are there other sickles in mythology or symbolism? I started thinking about stuff, and then I'm like, oh, well, there's a really intriguing correspondence or coincidence or synchronicity here, because the 5th astrological sign is Leo. And wouldn't you know it, Leo is well known for having the sickle portion of the constellation. So within Leo itself, its head and the front portion of its body, there's 6 stars that make what look like a sickle. And it is the 5th sign of the zodiac. And so again, just what are the odds with all of this stuff that, I'm making these connections, and then the 5th sign has literally this sickle shape within it, which again is well known. And so I didn't put that text there that says the sickle. You can look it up for yourself, and this is a thing that's been written about and discussed and everything else. And so to me, there could potentially be, some relationships between all of these things that I'm bringing up. But more than anything, this is all just food for thought, because I'm kind of curious now. I feel like I've come across at least 3 or 4 numbers where I have a pretty good bead on where they may have come from. And I'm just starting to see, these shapes of these numbers in the heavens, and being used elsewhere. So is this the real correspondence? I don't know, but more than anything, it's just something to ponder. So moving on, the number 5 and the other correspondences that relate to it, very, very interesting. As an example, there's 5 traditional senses. We have sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. And, perhaps this isn't all of the senses. I'm open to the fact that we have other senses, that maybe us being taught we only have 5 is to kind of cap or limit us in some way, shape, or form. But obviously, most people would agree that these are some of the main senses that we have. So 5 senses to experience the world. Very, very interesting, I think. And, it's interesting, too, that in Islam, there are a lot of things related to the number 5. I was kind of surprised. I knew about some of these, and then I actually looked into it, and there's like a whole laundry list of things related to the number 5 in Islam. And I've found this intriguing for a little while now, because I think that the case could be made that the number 4 largely corresponds with Christianity. Think of the cross. The number 5 largely corresponds with Islam. Think of the 5-pointed star right here. And then the 6 largely corresponds with Judaism. Think of the 6-pointed star, the Star of David. And so I made a video about this last year, and I think there's something to it. And I'm not letting go of it, because I think that there's a legit correspondence here. Now, I'm not saying everything about the number 4 is in Christianity, everything about the number 5, but the more I look into it, the more I'm finding that there's something going on here, right? Including the cards that those numbers correspond with. So the Emperor card has like a lot of fascinating things to do with Christianity, right? The Hierophant card, arguably, I think there's a lot of interesting things that have to do with Islam. And then same thing with Judaism and the Lovers card. And so maybe what I should do is just post the link to this video that I'm talking about in the description once I'm done here. And then you guys can check it out. And so I've been on this thread, or I've been pulling at this thread for a little while now. But here's just a few examples. There's 5 pillars of Islam, right? There's 5 keys to the Quranic mystery, and their prayer sort of system is that they pray 5 times a day to Mecca. And so just that in and of itself, I think, is really fascinating. And then, as I already pointed out, but there's that 5-pointed star within the crescent moon. And so this is a whole thing in Islam that when I've used this symbol to speak towards the symbolism of Islam, I've gotten a lot of pushback from it, because the orthodox, sort of way of looking at things is that they have no symbols, that there are no symbols in Islam. And I perhaps disagree, because there's many mosques that have, the crescent moon and 5-pointed star on it. But there's a lot to say regarding the 5-pointed star as it relates to Venus. And I think that a lot of Islam actually has a lot to do with Venus. And I think Isis is a correspondence to Venus, the goddess Isis. And so, to me, when I think about their culture, I see actually a lot of Venusian symbolism. And I think that the case could be made that when you see the 5-pointed star, that you are looking at the star Venus. You're looking at Venus as a star. You're looking at a Venusian symbol. I think there's more going on there, but I think that a lot of cultures have made this connection. And so when you see the 5-pointed star, I generally do think Venus, but now I have a whole another layer of understanding with what the star means and how there are even bigger implications beyond Venus. But we will see the very, very interesting relationship between the pentagram and Venus and its transit in the sky over the course of 8 years here pretty soon. I thought it was interesting, and I've heard about this over the last few years, but there is an understanding from the Aztecs that the age that we live in, that the sun that we currently have is the 5th sun. And so this is fascinating to me, because there are a couple of groups that have these different interpretations of what age we're in, what cycle we're currently going through. And there's material that you can read out there that we are currently living in the cycle of the 5th sun, right? So currently right now in the modern world, according to the Aztecs, this is the cycle that we're living through, right? And this reminded me very much as well, whether I believe in any of this stuff or not, right? And regardless of what you might think of this group here, the Theosophical Society. So the Theosophical Society, they have this idea of 5 races. There's a root race and then subsequent races. And that currently, right now, humanity is in its fifth race. So, isn't it interesting that different groups have different ideas of what age or cycle we are currently going through, and it relates to the number 5? I thought that was intriguing, whether it's the fifth sun, the fifth race, etc. I would not be surprised if there's other groups out there that have a similar understanding, and so to me, I thought this was worth relaying for a few reasons. And isn't it interesting, too, that we have here in the US the Pentagon? Of all the shapes, of all of the polygons out there, the Pentagon, right? I mean, isn't that just kind of wild to think about? And so we have the Pentagon, and we also here in the US, right? And we're not alone on this one, but there are a lot of countries that have 5-pointed stars all over their flags, right? So how did this star become like the default star, right? So of all of the stars that we could draw or design, the 5-pointed star seems to be like the main preeminent star. It's the star that you draw as a child. It's the star that if you're going to illustrate something and you want to put little stars in the sky, they're going to be 5-pointed, And even just the way you draw the star, to me, there's a satisfaction that kind of comes with it. And so it's not very fun to draw some other stars, but the 5-pointed star is a good time, right? And, at least when I was growing up, it wasn't uncommon where if you did something good in class, right? If you, completed some assignment or answered the question right, you would get a golden star. And so if you just look up, the symbolism of the 5-pointed star, you're going to see a lot of positive connotations with it, actually, more often than not. And so there's kind of a unifying quality to the 5-pointed star. How many cheesy graphics are there for birthday banners or I don't even know. I'm thinking of parties that have streamers and stuff, and just cheeseball graphics that you might see on napkins, at the Dollar Tree or something. And they have these 5-pointed stars all over it. So it's really interesting that you're just going to see generally 5-pointed stars way more often than any other star. And I think there's lots of good reasons for this, because its significance really is so strong. And once again, it seems to be a star that exists between planes, between realities, between the spirit realm and the physical realm. That's how I've kind of been looking at it. It's a bridge, and in so many different ways. But it's also interesting to note that let's not forget here that the American flag has how many stars on it? 50 stars, right? So what are the odds, again, that we're dealing with the 5-pointed star, and then we're also dealing with 50 stars on our flag? What is going on here with all of this stuff, right? So to me, that's not a coincidence that would be the case. But moving on, here's obviously just clearly a pentagon, right? So very clearly, when you're looking at a pentagon, there are 5 sides and there are 5 points, right? That connect all of the sides, that connect all of the lines. And so this is very obviously related to the number 5, as I just pointed out. But it's really interesting once you start looking into 5 symbolism, or once you start looking really into the symbolism of any number, you'll start realizing and recognizing that there are other numbers associated and that correspond with the number 5. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you want to express the 5, that you have to have 5 sides or 5 points, right, that connect with each other. As an example, the square also relates to the number 5 because there's 4 corners, there's 4 lines, but there's always that middle point that unifies it all, from which everything surrounds, right? This would be like the genesis or the origin or the sacred center of the shape. And so even within the square itself, you are actually encoding the 5. And so even when we look at this shape, the pentagon, 5 is the most obvious number that's associated with it. But you can kind of make the conclusion, or you can actually encode the 6 or decode the 6 out of this as well, because there are the 6 points, the 6 sides that connect with each other, and then there's that 6th point right in the middle. And so if you see a 7-pointed star, yes, it corresponds mostly with 7, but you can also decode an 8 out of that. And in fact, this is what people have done for a long time. And so this is something that I've really started wrapping my head around over the last, couple of years or so. The fact that in some symbolic systems, the middle point acts as the next number. It adds to the amount of points or the amount of sides in a star or a polygon. So it's a square related to the 4, but there's also that middle point. So it corresponds with the 5. And the same is true with the quartered circle here, right? So there's 4 lines, 4 directions coming from that center. And that center point represents a 5th point. So in a way, it kind of reminds me of what I said earlier regarding the man inside the pentacle, that there's 4 limbs, but it's the 5th point, it's the 5th spot that controls all of the limbs, right? And so here's a quote just to kind of unpack this information a little bit better. This comes from Jean Chevalier and the Dictionary of Symbols, which I highly recommend. And I mean, every single time I read from that book, it's pretty incredible. I mean, I get so much out of their entries. So definitely pick that up if you don't have it. But this is the entry for 5. This is just literally a couple of sentences from its 5 entry. 5 is the number of Earth, being the sum of the 4 cardinal directions and of the center, the phenomenal world. And so I thought this was a perfect thing to kind of put underneath the quartered circle, right? 5 is the number of Earth, being the sum of the 4 cardinal regions and of the center, the phenomenal world. And at some point he says, it is also the symbol of the universe, its 2 axes, vertical and horizontal, passing through the same center of order and perfection, and lastly, of the will of God. And so it's speaking to this glyph here. It's speaking to 2 lines intersecting, vertical and horizontal, and how from there, obviously, there are 4 directions, 4 cardinal directions or regions, it says here. But that center point is what unifies the directions. And it's the center point that would be its 5th point, its 5th expression, right? And so very recently, I was looking into some material related to the Tunnels of Set by Kenneth Grant. I did a presentation about it recently with Juan from the Juan on Juan podcast. And I think we had a good discussion about some of the symbolism and what that whole entire system is all about. But in one part of the book that I read, it broke down this symbol, the quartered circle, right? The cross within a circle. And the conclusion of the author was essentially that what this cross represents, it represents crossing the abyss. It represents crossing the abyss to the other side. And he refers to it as universe A and universe B, that this would be universe A, and that the other side, what I oftentimes refer to as the great beyond, would be universe B. And so the cross itself, what needs to be understood is that where the 2 lines cross, it's symbolic of transcendence. It's symbolic of a sacred center. And in my worldview, how I look at things now, it's symbolic of the world axis or the cosmic axis, which is the point from the North Pole to the North Star. And I've gotten into this in other streams, but to me, this is a channel or a bridge to the other side. This is the stairway to heaven, right? And so a lot of people today think that when you see this symbol, it is a solar symbol. And I personally, I know that's what people today say, but when you really start getting into its history, it's actually more of a geocentric symbol. And the cross, the vertical line and the horizontal line, where they cross right in the middle, that is the sacred center, which is related to the north, so it would be the northern part of this plane. And so this is the point of transcendence. This is the point of the stairway of heaven leading up to the northern sky, symbolically. And this is where Jacob's ladder would be, as an example. This is where the trunk of the world tree would be, right? And so within the cross, you get the 5, And so I think I've made my point pretty clear, but it was interesting to see that Dictionary of Symbols, Jean Chevalier, basically, he talks about it outright. So I think that's very, very intriguing. So for the longest time, I just assumed 4 was just the number of Earth, right? But I can see the case now that 5 is very, very strongly related to Earth because it is that center point. It is that gateway, or it's that middle way, to the great beyond. And he talks about the 2 axes right here, the horizontal and the vertical, right? Passing through the same center. So I think this is very, very fascinating, connecting the 5 with Earth and that 5th point being that middle point of transition. So you'll see that Shiva sometimes has 5 heads, right? But it's that middle head that's connected to his body, right? So again, this 5th point actually being the first point, and that last point or first point being what controls the 4 other limbs or the 4 other aspects of what's going on. So there's 5 heads, but clearly, there's one head that's connected to the body here. And so I think that's intriguing. And in some ways, this reminds me of Abraxas as well. And so Abraxas, generally, this is like the classic painting of Abraxas from Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages. And here you see Abraxas being pulled by 4 horses. When you look into the symbolism of the chariot or charioteer, if they're being pulled by 4 horses, which is known as a quadriga, the 4 horses represent the 4 elements, and then Abraxas or the charioteer represents the 5th element. So it would be the thing in charge, pretty much. So as it relates to the human body, Abraxas, the charioteer, would be the head, right? Controlling his 4 limbs, basically. And so even in like the chariot card, the Crowley version of the chariot card, there's 4 figures in front of the chariot, and then there's the charioteer himself. The charioteer is oftentimes surrounded by 4 posts or 4 pillars, right? The 4 cardinal directions, and he represents that center point. He represents the 5th point, that point of control or that point of transcendence, which obviously, looks like the quartered circle, right? And even the quartered circle too, it reminds me of a wheel as well. And when you're getting into wheel symbolism, the greatest wheel ever of all time symbolically is the wheel of heaven. It's the churning of the cosmos. And from the perspective of Earth, the cosmos revolves around one star, which is the North Star, the pole star, which is also known as the sky nail, right? The nail star. So it's the hub of the wheel. So once again, this relates back to northern symbolism. So the wheel revolves around a center axis, and that central axis is the cosmic or world axis, which corresponds with the North Pole and the North Star. And so you can see how there's just a lot of overlapping sort of ideas here. regarding this fifth point, and regarding Earth as it relates to the number 5, but also to the number 4, right? The four corners of Earth, four cardinal directions, all that stuff. And so here, once again, is the pentagram. So, like I said, I recently did a sort of deep dive on a few things that I talked about recently with Juan. And amongst, some of the material that I was reading, prepping for unrelated subjects to talk about, one of the books I was reading got into 5 symbolism like crazy. Like some of the stuff was just way over my head, and I was just like, whoa, this is insane. But there were a few things that I really did pick up and integrate and learn that I just want to talk about now that I fully kind of understand it. And I think that this is probably going to be, a rehash of sorts for some of you guys, right? But just look at the star, right? And look at the star and look at where the lines intersect with each other. And I'm highlighting one line, right? From the upper tip to the lower right tip, right? And that point that I'm highlighting, the 3 dots, that central dot, that is actually highlighting something very, very intriguing. And it's the point in which those lines intersect, obviously. And so this is actually demonstrating a ratio. And this is the phi ratio. And so you see here, if we're looking at it in terms of a ratio, the bottom portion would be 1, and then the upper portion would be 1.68, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on and on and on. And so what I have here are calipers, golden mean or golden ratio calipers, which I actually have on me right here. If I can grab it real quick. So I have these calipers right here. No matter how much I expand these calipers or contract these calipers, that ratio stays intact. That's what the golden mean or ratio is like all about. And so the golden ratio, this is what you're going to find in nature all over the place. This is what you're going to find all over the human body. This ratio of 1 to 1.618, right? This is embedded in the star, okay? In the 5-pointed star. And there's no other way for this star to be illustrated and be this harmonious, okay? And so it's a perfect shape, as far as I'm concerned. It's a perfect shape, yet there's imperfection as well. It's not the numbers that relate to the 5 and to the circle and to the spiral of life and everything else, they aren't whole numbers, right? So it's really interesting, and you're not going to get to the end of the sequence of pi or phi, right? But you can see that this ratio here, there's 1 unit, and then if you times that accordingly, then you are going to get the length of that upper section. And this ratio is amazing. There's so many fascinating things going on with all of this. But this is phi, right? So this is the Greek letter phi that represents 1.618, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's interesting, too, if you've been following my work, that phi is a pole and a hole. I've been saying that, symbolically, there's so many things that go back to poles and holes, right? The masculine and the feminine, the cosmic axis, right? And the opening or yoni, at the sacred center. And so it reminds me very much of a toroidal field, right? The fact that there's this projective nature and receptive nature. The fact that there is a central trunk, to the world tree that fits within the torus field. It's very, very interesting, the symbolism that was chosen for phi, right? And I may have said this already, but phi and 5, isn't that fascinating? The fact that just phonetically, there's a relationship between phi and 5. Well, when you start playing around with this ratio, 1 to 1.618, it's really interesting that this Fibonacci sequence, unfurls. And so the relationship between these squares are the same ratio that I pointed out in the star, right? That's how the star works. And so if the a big square on the left is symbolic of 1.618, then the upper square on the right is 1. And then literally that same ratio is duplicated, infinitely into this spiral here. And so that spiral is the same across the board with all of these squares. And so this golden spiral you will see all over the natural world with plants, with shells and things like that. It's seemingly all over the place. And so it's the spiral of life. But the Fibonacci sequence is a reduction of this ratio, as you progress through the numbers. So 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. There's a relationship with this sequence and with the ratio that I just explained to you guys, right? And so it creates an infinite spiral. It creates an infinite nested situation with all of these squares, right? And the spiral in and of itself is to me, it's almost symbolic of a bridge as well. It's a bridge from the inner to the outer, right? It reminds me very much of portal symbolism. It reminds me of gateway symbolism. It reminds me of transcendence, right? It reminds me of ascension and descension. So to me, when I see this spiral now, as it relates to all the things that I'm talking about, I see it as this connection between places, between realms. So speaking to what I've been saying regarding the 5 in and of itself, and how the 5 seems to be kind of this in-between number in a base 10 system. And so a lot of this symbolism has to do with the relationship of the sacred center and also the circle as well. And so notice that the spiral seemingly wants to go towards a sacred center, but it'll never quite ever get there. It's just this infinite sort of design or infinite sort of pattern. No matter how far you zoom in or how far you zoom out, this spiral and its ratio maintains the same sort of logic and the same sort of design. And so it's interesting too, when you reduce the pentagram and you follow the phi ratio, it's just amazing to me that the pentagram just gets nested kind of into itself, right? As it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, that angle of the upper point to the right point stays consistent the entire time, right? No matter how big, no matter how many times you do this, and no matter how many nested pentacles there are in there, upward or downward, that line stays completely consistent. That angle stays consistent the whole entire time, right? So this is honestly, I kind of feel like this is a situation where I'm just like scratching the surface on what some of this stuff means. And I know there are people out there who could do a much better job explaining it than myself, but this should at least maybe get you started. Or like I said, I'm sure some of you guys here are probably familiar with some of this stuff, but you really have the pentagram and you have the 5 to look towards regarding this kind of harmony, and how you can see that the natural world would embrace or use the mathematics found here to create things, right? Because it's like speaking towards the fractal nature of everything, pretty much. And so, as I was saying, really a lot of this stuff has to do with the relationship between the sacred center and the circle around it. So this sacred center I look at, I call it it's like a pole, it's like this sacred pole in the middle of the cosmos or of Earth. And the circle around it would be the cosmos itself. And so this is a circumpunct, which has been referred to as a godhead. It kind of looks like the eye of God. It kind of looks like the target symbol, right? Um, and the mathematics of pi, right, and the mathematics of phi have to do with that sacred center. And the mathematics that unfurl from this sacred center when you're trying to create a circle. And if there's no limits to this circle, this spiral sort of nature can kind of be created from it. And so there's another video actually that a friend sent me. Shout out to James from Family Fun Guy. And this guy in this video explained it really well. The nature of the sacred center, this origin point, this genesis that is the point, right? That is the monad. That this singular point, once it wants to be expressed in another dimension, that the mathematics of pi and phi really, really kind of come out and are generated from that when you want to create a circle, right? And so the circle and the dot, as I was saying earlier, that seems to be where the symbolism of all polygons and stars really derive from, which is why they all have that unified center, and they all, depending on how many points or how many lines are added to them, seemingly make just a circle, right? And obviously the circle symbolism, I mean, it's the womb, it's the vessel of everything. It's the great mother. In fact, when you're talking about this kind of symbolism from a thelemic Crowleyan sort of perspective, that the circle itself is Nuit. So this is the great mother. And then the dot itself is Hadit, right? And so it'd be more of the masculine sort of energy. And so from a Typhonian perspective, which I've gotten into recently in the last stream, you're dealing with Typhon, the mother, and then you're dealing with Set, the child, basically. So feminine, masculine, the masculine being within the feminine. And so when you're talking about cosmological symbolism, and this great mother sort of concept, the overlap between some of that stuff and math and how it relates to angles and how it relates to these different shapes and stuff, it just boggles the mind. There's so much going on with all of that. But moving on regarding speaking of, the great mother, there's a lot of interesting stuff related to Venus and the 5-pointed star or the pentagram as well that I'm sure you guys, some of you at least, are aware of. Probably, I mean, it's popular information, but I've posted about it a few times as well recently. And so even the first letter of Venus, right? It's the V. And so with the V, you're dealing with symbolism that relates to the 5, just in and of itself with that. Because Roman numeral 5 is the V, right? But it gets much deeper from there, because Venus, over the course of 8 years, creates a 5-petaled flower in the night sky from the perspective of Earth. People refer to this as the Venus rose or the Venus pentagram. And this is what another overlay looks like, kind of illustrating the mathematics behind that. And so Venus, as I was saying earlier, has a very, very strong correspondence with the number 5, with the pentagram. It makes this shape over 8 years from Earth, which is mind-blowing for a few different reasons. I just think it's intriguing that Venus is also, it corresponds with 2 different signs. It is a earth sign and it's also an air sign. So it rules Libra, but then it also rules Taurus. And so there's an earthy nature and an airy nature with Venus. And the same is true actually with Mercury, because Mercury, corresponds with Gemini, which is an air sign, but then it also rules Virgo, which is an earth sign. So these are the only two planets under the traditional system that correspond with more than one sign and have more than one elemental correspondence with them. And so we just went through Taurus season, right? And Taurus is ruled by Venus, as I just said. And so this is actually where a lot of my 5 symbolism started coming into play. And I was just like really, really interested in learning more. And then inadvertently, I ended up learning more based on what I was reading. And I wasn't trying to learn about, 5 symbolism necessarily. But the number 5, as it relates to women and their cycle, is really interesting too. Speaking of cycles and the sacred feminine, because the average cycle of the average menstrual cycle and days of bleeding for a woman on average is 5. There's on average 5 days of bleeding, which is really, really intriguing, right? And kind of speaks to a lot of the things that I'm referring to here. So the cycle of a woman used to be a keeper of time. That there was a period in time in history where you can rely on a woman's cycle. And that this is, in fact, something that I learned recently, is that this is why we call them periods, because it's a reference to a period of time. And so, so women have this long history of being associated with keepers of time, actually. And so, and it has to do with their own biological clock, their own cycles. And so it's just really intriguing to me that the average day of bleeding, the average number of days of bleeding are 5 in total. And so I even asked my girlfriend this. Well, as I read it, I asked her, I'm like, babe, how many days? And then she said 5. And I was like, whoa, okay, gotcha. So to me, that's whoa, it's just kind of mind blowing, because this is how we come through this. This is how we get here. So woman, mother, the womb, that is the real gateway here, right? This is how we come into existence. This is how we come and visit this plane and do all of the things that we do, right? So to me, the fact that the terrestrial gateway, has, and I know there's other numbers associated with the average cycle to 28 days and lunar stuff and everything else, but this one sort of number, this number 5, I can't not highlight it when I'm seeing it. So this is my sort of justice towards that. But again, the 5 being related to the sacred feminine via Venus, and also in this way, can't be ignored, in my opinion. And I think some of this stuff was revered and understood way more than we might give it credit for today. And so with all of the stuff relating the 5, to Earth, as I was reading earlier, right, with the 4 points, the crossroads, the 2 axes crossing over each other, and that middle point being the 5th point, and then Venus from the perspective of Earth making this pentacle, it's really intriguing that we have in the tarot tradition that we generally will put a 5-pointed star on a pentacle, which is the suit related to Earth, right? And so whether it's a coin or a pentacle or a disc, we generally put a 5-pointed star on top of it to indicate Earth. This speaks to, so many of the things that I've been talking about, but it seems as though, beyond just the 4, that the number 5 and its correspondence with Earth is very, very, very strong. So this is one of the reasons why I believe this is the case. And so you're referring to Mother Earth, right? The abundance of Earth. You're referring to the fact that all 5 elements are relevant here, right? Whether you're talking about air, fire, water, or earth, or spirit. And so this is where the elements can play. This Earth is where the elements can play. It's where they can interact with each other. It's where they can fuse together and break apart. It's basically Earth is kind of like, in so many ways, it's almost like an alchemical lab. It's where all of these elements, beyond the five elements or four elements, it's where all of these elements exist. And it's where things, amalgamate. I think of solve coagula. And so to dissolve and coagulate, it's where things break down and come together here, right? But all of these things, all of these elements, physical elements, right? They come from the earth. And so we have the earth to thank for a lot of these metals and various elements that you might see on the periodic table, right? And so also, just with my cosmology, and I know I'm not alone here, but it's not sort of uncommon to look at Earth as potentially a disk as well. And so to me, it's just very intriguing that in the Crowley deck, he doesn't refer to them as pentacles, but he refers to them as discs. And so is the disc or the pentacle literally a reference to Earth itself? I think it is, and so that's something I wanted to throw out there. The fact that on the pentacle, it is tradition to have a 5-pointed star for all of the reasons I've already outlined. And it's interesting, too, that a lot of the minor cards, I think all of them actually, that correspond with 5, tend to be cards that correspond with some sort of struggle or some sort of conflict, some sort of hurdle, right? And I feel like there's good reason for this, actually. For a little while, it kind of eluded me. I'm like, why would all the 5 cards be negative or, represent something that is, this kind of struggle or whatever? And I think it has to do with the fact that the 5 is in the middle of this base 10 or base 9 sort of sequence. So here you see 9 points. And when I was looking into the symbolism, one of my books was referring to the fact that 5 is in the middle of the, I can't remember the term that they used for the 9, but 5 is in the middle of 9. And this is an important position, basically. Or if you're looking at it from 1 through 10, 5 is still, right there in the middle. There is no actual number that would be identifiable as the central number. If you're looking at it through a decimal system, though, if I'm not mistaken, right, it would be 5.5, right? So that's kind of interesting. But regardless, whether you're looking at, 10 numbers or 9 numbers, 5 is right there in the middle. And so it's not early on and it's not towards the end of the sequence, but it's in the center. 5 has a lot to do with the center. And so when you're looking at the mathematics that we commonly use, right, the base 10 system, 5 plays a very, very interesting role. And so in a way, to me, the symbolism that I kind of pick up is that because it is a bridge number, it represents a passage of some sort. And it might represent, say, like the top of a hill, right? So you can imagine, at least here with these dots, the first 4 dots, you're climbing up the hill. The 5th dot, you are at the top of the hill, you've plateaued. And then the 4 remaining dots, you will be going downhill. And so that position up top, there is kind of a, what would I say? It's unique and different amongst the rest. And so I would say that there's almost kind of like this no man's land sort of thing. So it's almost like the middle of a road trip, So maybe when you're first taking off in the beginning, you're just excited to be on the road and you have energy and this and that. And then by the end of it, you're probably excited too because you're close to your destination. But in the middle of the trip, you might think like, oh my God, there's so much more to go. There's a lot more journeying to do. We're right in the middle of something. When people are busy, what do they say? Oh man, I'm right in the middle of something, right? So there's this idea of being stuck when it comes to the middle of anything, basically, right? There's this idea of stagnation in the middle, that there isn't that the flow or whatever is perhaps better elsewhere. And so to me, that's kind of what I get out of the number 5. This sort of stagnation, this kind of stuck in the middle, potentially this no man's land sort of thing, the middle of some sort of journey kind of aspect. Um, but you want to push through those points, and you'll be glad you did, right? So generally, the 6th card of the minor arcana represents success, or it represents overcoming this 5 sort of dynamic, being stuck in the middle, if you will. And so hopefully that makes sense. But that's kind of how I right now am perceiving things. So regarding the V and the 5, right? Very, very interesting. One of the things that's still tripping me out is the fact that most of Taurus season takes place during the 5th month of the year, and it's ruled by Venus. There's that V. And then also in the night sky, when you look at the Taurus constellation, you will see a gigantic V in the sky, right? It's one of the most prominent V's in the night sky around. And even you can see that the Hierophant here, the high priest, he's almost kind of making a V with his left hand, right? But here you're going to see all sorts of pentacles. You're going to see that 5-petaled flower behind the Hierophant's head. You're going to see that pentacle in his chest. If you really want a deep dive on the Hierophant card, you can check out my live stream where I went through literally all of the Hierophant cards in my collection. And, I talked about a lot of different symbols that you'll find in these cards. But one of the things that I wanted to just kind of bring up again is the fact that the Hierophant, or the high priest, he represents a bridge as well. And in fact, I will skip ahead here. The title of Pope goes back to Pontifex Maximus, which means the greatest bridge builder. So these popes, the high priest, he's looked at as being a bridge builder. That's the idea, is that he is kind of the mediator between the people and God, essentially. And so there's all sorts of ideas about how this bridge is built. Is it via sacred geometry? Is it his understanding of mathematics and sacred geometry that allows him to cross this bridge? Is it his understanding of etymology and language? Is that the bridge? Language is a bridge between people, right? It bridges the gap between people. You guys can understand, hopefully, you guys can understand what I'm saying because I'm using my words, right? I'm communicating with you guys. And there's a lot of symbolism related to the high priest and the Hierophant that relates to the throat and neck, actually. So it's really interesting that he has a beard over his neck. And then in the Rider-Waite version, you could see, it's not a choker, I know, but it almost looks like this big choker thing over his neck, right? And so they are kind of a go-between, or an in-between realms, between the terrestrial realm and the spirit realm, right? And so to me, the symbolism matches up really nicely with the fact that the Hebrew letter that corresponds with the Hierophant is Vav, which means nail. And so the nail binds things together. The same way ether or spirit, being the 5th element, also binds things together, right? So also the same way a bridge, brings different parts of, a region together, so if you want to cross a river, if you build a bridge, now you actually have access to what's going on the other side of the river. So to me, the nail symbolism blew my mind this year, because this year I learned that one of the other names for Polaris, as I've already said, is the nail star, or sky nail. So to me, this is a symbolic representation of the world or cosmic axis as it bridges the different levels of the heavens together, of the cosmos together. So to me, all of this stuff really goes back to the cosmic axis, being this path, or this way, this middle way to the other side. The cosmic axis is what Hermes uses to go from plane to plane, from place to place. It is the trunk of the world tree. So when I refer to the cosmic axis, the world axis, it is also the world tree or cosmic tree. It's the same exact thing. The symbolism is the same. And I think the nail symbolism is essentially the same as well. And so the Hierophant has access to this bridge. And to me, this is what those crossed keys represent. So it's really common, in the Hierophant card to have these crossed keys. And so it's the keys to the other side, whatever they might actually be. And what's speaking to all of this too is the fact that the papal cross that the Hierophant is holding, you see there's 3 crossed arms, right? One of the ideas behind the symbol is that it actually represents a ladder. And so a ladder is another symbol that represents the cosmic axis. It's like Jacob's ladder. And so it's going to the northern portion of the sky, right? So it's all speaking towards this bridge sort of concept between this reality or domain and the other reality or domain that might be referred to as the spirit realm or the underworld, right? Well, the underworld in Egyptian mythology, in that pantheon, in that tradition, is referred to as the duat. So that is the other side, right? And the duat had a symbol associated with it. And it was the 5-pointed star. Wouldn't you know it? So the underworld to the Egyptians was most accurately or best symbolized with this right here, this sigil, this glyph, which is a 5-pointed star. So this is intriguing for all sorts of different reasons, right? It seems as though truly the 5 is symbolic of this bridge between domains, between realms. The Egyptians, I believe, kind of saw it that way, that if you're going to the other reality, universe B, if you will, or the duat, the underworld, this is the symbol that corresponds with it. And I think it has to do with all of the things that I've already outlined, right? If you kind of furthering my point here, it's interesting that when you look into the Hebrew alphabet, Hey is the letter that corresponds with 5. Its numerical value is 5, and I believe it's the 5th letter in the Hebrew alphabet as well. And I believe it also corresponds with, or perhaps the E was derived from Hey, actually. And so E is the 5th letter in our alphabet, in the English alphabet. And so the meaning behind Hey is window. A window to what? A window to where? I would argue it's the other side. I would argue it's to the underworld. I would argue that it's to the heavens or to the duat, whatever you want to say. I would argue that it's a window to universe B. And so I think that this is what the 5 has represented and the pentagram has represented for a very, very, very long time, right? And so if you've been following my work, you might know that I've been getting into Lovecraftian symbolism and what that's all about, right? Well, one of the things I just wanted to mention as kind of my final thoughts regarding all of this stuff is the fact that, and just to kind of catch you up to speed if this is new information. So it seems to me like the Lovecraft mythos is essentially becoming, or has become, depending on who you ask, the pantheon of the modern world, the modern Western world. Thomas Sheridan says that it's the Western pagan mythology of choice, that it's going to become that it's going to become the new pantheon that people who are pagans are going to revere. And that, in his opinion, and I see where he's coming from, it's already happening, basically. And so there are people today that use, these gods, these deities from the Lovecraftian mythos, and they're using it in their magical workings. And they're using it in all sorts of different interesting, kind of crazy, far out sort of ways. And so, at one point it was appropriate to worship in the West, right? You were acknowledging these deities or those deities. Obviously the Western occult tradition heavily reveres, depending on the group, I guess, the Egyptian pantheon, right? So there was periods of time where people were, acknowledging the Egyptian deities. There are people who still do that. But now this has all been updated because, according to some people, the Lovecraftian mythos is sound, that the deities that Lovecraft was writing about, and there's a whole debate on where he got these ideas from and everything else. But researching this stuff over the last handful of years, I felt like I've needed to give it my due diligence, just to kind of see what's going on. And what it's speaking towards is that these elder gods, these great old gods, the great old ones, that they actually represent another level of deity that's more primordial. There's different tiers to the system, but there are great old ones that are far older than other deities. And I was blown away to realize, or to learn recently, that their number is 5. Of all the numbers, their number is 5. And Lovecraft put this in his work in a bunch of his stories, basically. And so even I looked it up today, his work at the Mountain of Madness, he literally makes reference to the number 5 52 times. So 52 times he makes reference to the number 5. To me, that was just really, really fascinating. And so according to, that mythology, the great old ones had a reverence for the number 5. And I think it has to do with a lot of the things that I kind of outlined for you guys here, and so this kind of is related to this Hierophant concept, by the way, that the Hierophant is almost like a demigod, right? He's almost like a god on earth, but he has access, or he's in communication with another tier of deity that the common people do not, right? They want to gatekeep that relationship. And isn't it interesting that, again, the Hierophant is the 5th card? So I think the number 5 has a lot to do with the oldest deities, and I think the oldest realm in existence, which would be the underworld or the cosmos itself, right? It seems to me like there is just this very clear as above, so below relationship between, what's happening here and really, really ancient deities. Okay. And Lovecraft, however he knew it, he kind of encoded this into his work, right? And so this is just one quote from At the Mountains of Madness. And so he's describing this alien environment. It consisted of crude spirals and angles roughly following the quintile, which is a reference to 5, mathematical tradition of the old ones. So here he actually literally just says it, that the mathematical tradition of the old ones was everything related to the number 5, which means that it's related to the pentagram, essentially, And so this speaks to what I just outlined here, the fact that the Egyptians considered the duat, the underworld, to correspond with the 5-pointed star of all things, right? And so, the mathematics behind our bodies, it's truly divine, and it's super, super, super ancient stuff. And so hopefully I kind of filled you in on some of the new things that I'm learning about right now and geeking out about regarding the number 5. But that is what I have, guys. So thank you so much for just hanging out and watching this. If you like my style of decoding, if you got anything out of this presentation, you can become a patron. So patreon.com/symbolicstudies. I would very much appreciate it. Every bit goes a long way. I've got 3 different tiers to choose from. Also, once again, just want to say thank you to my current patrons. You guys are awesome. Much, much love. And every patron, by the way, gets a study packet. And so I have 4 pages for the 4 elements, one for water, one for fire, air, and earth. and I go through all sorts of symbolism in the study packet. And so I send you a PDF directly, and the correspondences here are really, really interesting. If you're interested in astrology, the tarot, I have Platonic solid correspondences in here too. I talked about at least one of them earlier. You might get something out of it. Conversely, if you're not interested in signing up for Patreon, you guys can just donate any amount you wish, and I'll send you a study packet. All you have to do is make a donation to my Venmo, PayPal, or Cash App, but include your email address. That's really important. Include your email address, and I'll send you this study packet. You can print it out. You can share it with friends. You could do whatever you want with it. I think there's a lot of good information in there. And then also, I'm available for graphic design services, so Symbolic Studios. I've been a graphic designer for 20 years, and I've designed everything you can imagine. And so I would say one of my strengths definitely is branding, logo design, stuff like that. So if you have a small business or you work for a business that is in need of that service, definitely let me know. But I've done all sorts of things for people. So packaging, websites, t-shirts, posters, all sorts of stuff. And just to remind you too, this is one of my designs right here. So you can check that out on Etsy if you're so inclined. I'll send you a study packet, a printed study packet, and I will sign it and ship it myself. I'm also available for tarot readings and study sessions. So if anyone is interested in a tarot reading, you can text me at 503-893-4606. And by the way, this number is good for anything. So if you want a poster, but for whatever reason you don't want to go through Etsy or whatever, or you're interested in design work, you guys can just text me. So feel free. And study sessions are fun. They're interesting, and they've been coming through lately. And I just recently did a study session with someone, and they shout out Claire, and she wanted to know about Freemasonic symbolism because she purchased a print that was Freemasonic in nature. And she was like, "What's going on here? I want to know more about the symbolism." And so we got into it for an hour. And I definitely laid it all out there for her. And so people have reached out for all sorts of different things. Tarot lessons, astrology stuff, things like that. So if you think my symbolic awareness can be of service to you, reach out and let me know what you're thinking. Also, we've got a P.O. Box. So P.O. Box 930, Carson, Washington, 98610. I'm really stoked to say that people have been sending stuff to the P.O. Box, actually, like literally as of this week. And so that is really, really awesome. And so if you have a letter or, I don't know, anything that you want to send me, feel free. That's how you can do it. Also, I should let you know that my girlfriend has a podcast. She has a couple, actually. One we co-host together. And it is called The Healing Home. So you can find it here on YouTube if you're on YouTube. And it's Michelle's Healing Home. And she does lots of great interviews with some pretty interesting people. Some actually very interesting people, if I'm being honest. And she is an herbalist. And she's killing it right now with all of that. So I encourage you guys to check it out. Michelle's Healing Home. I have a link in the description. And then also, like I said, we have a podcast that we co-host together called Last Thursday. And so last Thursday, it's very casual. I bring a topic to the table. She brings the topic to the table. There's divination. We hang out with the chat. We have something special to drink. There's a few things going on there that I don't know. I feel like I really can just let my hair down. You know what I mean? So anyway, it's fun. You guys should check it out. And my website is symbolicstudies.com. You can find everything there. And that's it, everyone. I'm going to check the chat real quick to see who all is here. Say hello, say thank you, and then I will be on my way. So let's see here. Right on. Awesome. Cool. What's up, Benjamin? How you doing, dude? Nice to see you. Gordy is here. I know. Yeah, exactly. Let his hair down. Right. What hair? So Histories, Mysteries Unveiled is here. Howdy ho. Gigi Abby Lynn. Hello, hello. Sarah G, what's going on? Elliot is here. Michelle's healing home. There she is. My girlfriend. Mr. Obvious is here, pointing out the obvious, probably. Polymathing, what's going on? Let's see. I'm sure there are more people. Hey there, Mike Wick 77. Oh, what's up? Amy, Leaves of Grass. Nice to see you. Alex Antros, hello. Birdog, the Crypto Ronin, what's up, dude? Rachel is here, and I'm sure there's more and more if I just continued scrolling up here. Oh, LC King, what's up, man? PK, what's up? So some familiar faces as always. But yeah, so hopefully you guys got something out of that presentation. It's kind of a quick one, but I think there's some good stuff in there. So, yo, what's up, Flat Earth Hippie? Hank, nice to see you, man. Alrighty, that's going to do it. Until next time, you guys take care. See ya.